Welcome to the module on demonstrative and relative adjectives and pronouns. This will be covering chapters 13 and 14 in your textbook and mounts. The demonstrative adjectives are the adjectives that are translated in English as this or these, which is the paradigm you see in front of you right now. And then on the next slide, we'll go over the paradigm for that and those. The demonstrative pronouns function like 2-1-2 adjectives. And so they'll use the masculine and neuter second declension endings and the feminine first declension endings. But one of the defining characteristics of the demonstrative adjective this or these, which in the nominative singular is hutas, is that it'll either have a rough breathing mark to start the stem or the letter tau to start the stem. And you'll see the rough breathing mark in the nominative singulars of the masculine and feminine forms. And then you'll also see them again in the nominative plurals of the masculine and feminine forms. But the rest of the paradigm will feature or begin with the letter tau. So let's wipe the board and start off learning the paradigm. So the lexical form for this or these is hutas, hate with a rough breathing mark, and tuta. And so you would write the lexical form like this. And for the masculine forms, hutas, notice that the case ending is os, as we would expect. For the genitive singular, the stem uses the internal diphthong u, but instead of a rough breathing mark, as you see in the nominative singular, it begins with a tau. And then we see the case ending u for the genitive singular, as we would expect for a second declension masculine form. So the nominative singular masculine form is hutas, the genitive singular is tuta, the dative singular is to with the iota subscript. The accusative singular is to ton. The nominative plural doesn't use the tau as part of its stem. Instead, it uses the rough breathing mark and then also the nominative plural masculine ending. So it'd be hutoi. But for the genitive singular, we expect the tau, to tone, the dative plural, to tois, and the accusative plural, to tus. And so hopefully you'll see that you have the os, u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. Those are the case endings you would expect. And the stem, usually begins with a tau with the u internal diphthong as part of the stem, except for the nominative singular and nominative plural forms. So let's say the paradigm one more time. Let's do it together. 1, 2, 3. Hutas, tutu, tuto, tuton, hutoi, tuton, tutois, tutus. Now the feminine form uses the first declension feminine endings, and so in the nominative singular, you have a different internal vowel, the ow, the alpha upsilon, and then you have the case ending a. Now, the thing about demonstrative adjectives is that whatever the vowel sounding ending is for the case ending, the internal vowels always match. So if you have alpha sounding vowels or the long eta sounding vowels, you will expect the diphthong ow, the alpha upsilon, to be used in the stem. And so since the feminine accusative forms use the alpha sounding or eta sounding vowels for most of the case endings except for the genitive plural, you would expect the internal vowel to be ow with alpha upsilon throughout the paradigm, except where it's shaded here, because it doesn't use an alpha or eta sounding case ending. It actually uses own. So let's go over the whole paradigm, begin with the nominative singular. So remember, the nominative singular and nominative plural forms for the feminine begin with a rough breathing mark, and then you have the internal vowel ow being used. So to say this in the feminine singular, it's haute, haute. Notice that it's a rough breathing mark here. So it is not the same as ate. If I were to say ate, that's she. But with a rough breathing mark, haute, haute, with a rough breathing mark, this is translated as this, and as a demonstrative adjective, it would be attached to a feminine noun. So it could be, for example, this day, haute hemera. If I were to write this out, haute hemera would be this day. But aute, with a smooth breathing mark, is translated as a pronoun she. For the genitive singular, put the tau in front of the internal diphthong ow, and then the case ending would, as we would expect for the first declension forms, is ace in the genitive singular, and the genitive singular feminine for the demonstrative adjective is tautes, tautes. For the dative singular, it would be taute with an iota subscript. For the accusative singular, it would be tautain. For the nominative plural, again for the nominatives, we expect a rough breathing mark, not the tau, to be in the stem, and this would be hautai. And then for the genitive plural, remember that the feminine forms do use own as the case ending for the genitive plural, and because this own, this omega here, is not an alpha or eta sounding vowel, the internal vowels will not be ow, but it will match the case ending internal vowel. So this would be actually two-tone, two-tone. In fact, two-tone will be the genitive plural for the masculine form, the feminine form, and as you go over the neuter form as well. The dative plural, the case ending is ice. So the internal vowel goes back to ow, and this would be tautais as the dative plural demonstrative. And then the accusative plural would be tautos, tautos. So let's say the feminine case ending, feminine demonstrative adjectives from the nominative singular. Begin with the nominative singular, 1, 2, 3, hate, tates, tate, iota subscript, tatain, hatai, two-tone, tatais, tatas. Now let me clear the board, and let's go over the last paradigm, which is the neuter. The neuter uses the tau for all the forms of the demonstrative adjective. It's going to use the same endings like ata, the same second declension neuter endings as auta. So using the stem beginning with a tau, we have tu-ta for the nominative singular in the neuter form, tu-tu for the genitive singular. The dative singular would be tu-to, and the accusative singular, which always matches the nominative singular for the neuter nouns, is tu-ta. The nominative plural, if you recall, the case ending for the plural forms is alpha, and yes, because we have an alpha sounding vowel in the case ending, the internal vowel for this form is ow. So tau-ta is the plural form for the neuter nouns in the nominative plural. So this is tau-ta, tau-ta, and then because the genitive plural is own, the internal vowel goes back to the u, and it's two-tone for the genitive plural neuter nouns. It is tu-tois for the dative plural, and because The nominative plural and accusative plural share the same forms. We're expecting an alpha as the case ending. The internal vowel for the neuter plural is tauta. So let's say the forms for the demonstrative adjective in the neuter gender. 1, 2, 3. Tuta, tutu, tuto, tuta, tauta, tutone, tutois, tauta. And those are the forms for the demonstrative adjective. The demonstrative adjectives for the English equivalent, that or those. In the Greek, that's the 2-1-2 adjective ekenos, ekene, ekena. Is a much simpler form, so we'll be actually able to zip through these forms fairly quickly. The stem doesn't change, and it simply uses the 2-1-2 pronominal endings. So for the masculine form, akenos, so if you want to say that man, for example, you would use the second declension masculine endings, and the stem doesn't change, so the nominative singular masculine form is akenos. The genitive is akenu. The dative is akeno. The accusative is akenon. The nominative plural is akenoi. The genitive plural is akenon, and the dative plural is akenois. The accusative plural is akenus. And so, just as you would expect for a second declension pronominal or adjectival ending for the masculine forms, you see os, u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. So let's say the form all together from the beginning. Nominative singular masculine. Akenos, akenu, akeno, akenon, akenoi, akenoin, akenois, akenus. The feminine form uses the expected and regular form for the feminine first declension endings, and the stem doesn't change. So akene is a nominative singular feminine form, and the genitive singular feminine form is akenes. The dative is akene iota subscript. The accusative is akenane. The nominative plural feminine form is akenai. The genitive form is akenon. The dative plural form is akenais. And the accusative plural form, by the way, oh, I just noticed this should be a plural. Sorry about that. Is akenos. And again, notice that it uses the typical first declension endings as we would expect. It uses a, ace, a iota subscript, ain, I, on, ice, os. Let's say the form, starting with the nominative singular. 1, 2, 3, akene, akenes, akene, akenane, akenai, akenon, akenais, akenos. And what about the neuter forms for the demonstrative adjective, that or those? So that being how you translate it if it's in the singular form, and those if it's is how you translate it if the nouns and the pronoun or the adjectives in the plural. It again uses the form that we would expect as with ata, the word for it. And so we have akena for the nominative singular neuter form, akenu for the genitive singular, akeno with iota subscript for the dative singular, and akena for the accusative singular. Akena with an alpha for the nominative plural neuter form, akenon for the genitive plural, akenois for the dative plural, and akena with an alpha for the accusative plural. Let's say the neuter forms together. 1, 2, 3. Akena, akenu, akeno, akena, akena, akenon, akenois, and akena. And those are the forms for the demonstrative adjectives.